Oof, climate change. Okay, this video is probably going to get taken down by YouTube, but enjoy it while it's there. So yeah, climate change, this is like the hallmark of stupid science and how science is destroying the world because politicians are putting billions of dollars of stuff into this. The mayor of Calgary is spending $80 billion on her climate accord. And what does this thing do? It just steals people's cars. It's so, like, the irrationality is just mind-blowing. Okay, so according to it, only 30% of people will be able to drive any cars, including electric. I'm like, I thought electric cars were okay. It's like, no, you can't even drive an electric car because that's too much climate. And the fact is, most scientists do believe into this. They buy into the totally unreasonable version of climate change, the net zero, where we want to get rid of 100% of man-made CO2. And they don't follow the reasonable version, which makes some sense. I think there is like we should care somewhat about CO2. It's a form of environmental damage, and it could have some bad impacts at some point. Now, before I get into this, I'd like to say there's a really good scientist on the subject. She's an actual climate scientist. She knows more about this than me for sure. And her name's Judith Curry. So check her up on YouTube. You can find a lot of her videos. And they're probably better than mine, but I'm a philosopher, so I'm going to just look at it from a logical approach, and we're just going to look for contradictions and stupid logic within the narrative, okay? So maybe I'll get you some that are new, that you haven't heard before. So, first of all, I guess you get different views. You get some people who say climate change isn't real, the Earth isn't warming. You get some people who say the Earth is warming, but it's not due to humans. And then you get some people who say the Earth is warming and it's due to humans, but there's not a whole lot we can do about it and we shouldn't care that much. And then you get the people who say, yeah, it's warming due to humans and we should just call it the apocalypse and do everything. We spend the entire economy on that, right? And that's a very normal position today, especially among politicians, and that's depressing, very depressing, and going to cause a lot of serious economic harm, especially in Africa. Now, let's get into some of this logic, okay? So you can watch this video by Sabian, what's her name, Holzenfelder, and Bill Gates. They have this talk, and Bill Gates is saying in this video that he never plants trees and that planting trees is a scam. I'm like, there's just never any solution to climate change except eliminating all man-made CO2. And this one is just so stupid because he's saying there's no point planting trees because in order to get rid of all carbon emissions and reach net zero, you'd have to plant an amount of trees which is very high and unrealistic to do. And I'm like, well, why couldn't you just plant half that amount and then reduce man-made CO2 by half? Maybe that would actually cost a lot less money and a lot less inconvenience than just getting rid of all carbon, right? Like maybe you can let carbon producing power in Africa and then gradually phase it out in the West when we get superior technology and then plant a bunch more trees. Like that seems like a pretty reasonable solution, right? So which is, no, I never plant a single tree. That's what Bill Gates says. So I mean, like, are these people even serious about ending climate change? Like, how can you argue planting trees is a bad thing, okay? Now, according to Bjorn Lomborg, he's a political scientist. In Germany, they spent $60 billion or something. Fact check that number. It's probably off. I'm just going by memory. It's around 60 billion to reduce CO2, man-made CO2, and they reduced it by something like 1% for $60 billion. I'm like, well, maybe planting trees would have actually done a lot more than all this current policy, right? Because a lot of people actually need cars to like work and stuff, you know? Anyways, so yeah, like you look at the actual logic, it makes zero sense. And then the next thing is this whole net zero goal. Okay, so first of all, according to climate models, the Earth is warming naturally with or without man-made CO2. So you're not stopping global warming by eliminating man-made CO2. You're only reducing the speed that global warming occurs. So you're delaying it. And we're always talking about like the future. And I'm like, well, if it's still going to get warmer in the future, you're not stopping any of these disasters, right? Even if you reach net zero, you're just delaying all these supposed disasters that come from climate change. You're delaying it from 100 years in the future to 200 years. So why don't we think about our great-grandchildren? Why do we only think about our grandchildren? What about our great-grandchildren? What's the difference whether our great-grandchildren or grandchildren get hammered by climate change, right? Either ways, you're not stopping all this stuff. And then the third thing is like this hyperbole. This is like another thing that's so annoying with climate change, is this extreme hyperbole. So we always hear it's going to be the end of the world. They're like, well, climate change could cause disasters in the future. It's possible. And I'm like, well, you know what is causing extreme human suffering right now? War and poverty. And when you're telling people to be much, much, much more poor so they can avoid poverty, that's not a very convincing argument. When you're telling Africans, you can't build coal power because it'll make you poor in the future, that's not very convincing because they're starving to death right now. And like, I'm like, think about these other priorities. I'm like, there is war in Ukraine. Okay, this matters a lot. All right, this could turn into a nuclear war between the US and Russia. That is a big, big concern that could destroy the entire Earth tomorrow, right? So, but always pushing this climate change thing to the very front of every issue is very obnoxious, okay? Even if we believe the climate alarmists, it's obnoxious because it still doesn't make sense to react the way they're reacting. It's a lot like COVID-19, right? We're exaggerating the impact, and then we're overreacting like crazy. We're treating it as like the highest priority when there's other things that matter much more. All right, so obviously, like if you study, like if you look into the climate science, you see all this cult-like behavior, right? There's all this no questioning stuff, and so back to net zero. Sorry, I'm trying to do this all in one recording session, no breaks, right? So hopefully I can get this whole video in one take and get all the thoughts most of the thoughts I wanted to get out on the subject, right? So let's say you reduce climate change by 50%. How is that not good? Like, you're telling me that if let's say we have a heat wave, right? And you're telling me if this heat wave is half as bad in the future, that's not beneficial. Like, shouldn't it have some benefit to like achieve 50% of net zero? Why do we always say there's no benefit to achieving net zero? Bill Gates says in his TED talk, if you don't achieve absolute elimination of man-made CO2, it's the same as doing nothing. I'm like, that's just so irrational. And I know Bill Gates isn't a scientist, but for some reason he is. Like, whatever he says gets taken extremely seriously by the science community, even though he's not a scientist. And I guess being rich just kind of makes you a scientist. So anyways, I'm sure you'll find scientists saying that exact same argument. I'm sure I could Google it and find a bunch who are saying the same thing. Okay, so that's the next thing. Like, why is there never any like reasonable alternative? Like, why can't we just plant a bunch of trees, drive more fuel efficient vehicles, and then work on developing alternative sources of power, and that'll have like a 50% decrease in climate change or whatever, right? And you're telling me that is no benefit? I mean, that makes absolutely zero sense, right? And even just breathing produces CO2, right? Like being alive and breathing produces CO2. So like, are they actually really thinking about what zero man-made CO2 means? And additionally, it comes back to this nature fallacy where anything man does is bad. According to the environmentalist, anything man change is bad and anything natural is okay. So if nature produces 50 billion tons of CO2, then that's fine. Nobody cares. But if man does, then it's the worst thing ever. And I'm like, well, what if we reduce CO2 to the point that man is producing less CO2 than like nature, right? Like, then shouldn't we be more focused on naturally produced CO2? Shouldn't that become the bigger priority? Like, if we reduce, you know what I mean? Why does natural phenomenon, why is it always okay when something changes naturally, right? And to me, it doesn't make any sense. Like, I talk about this in my environmental conservation video. Like, we go through so much effort to protect all these wolves and dangerous predators, and I think it's all to kick humans out of nature. We want all these predators, so humans stop enjoying nature, and they all just sit in their room depressed, right? And I think that's a lot of what they're actually doing when you look at, like, they keep making it harder and harder to get out to nature and enjoy yourself. But like conservationists, they always get super mad when humans make an animal go extinct, but when an animal just naturally goes extinct, they don't care. It's like, it was a natural process. It was determined to be extinct. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, and the same thing is true with climate change. Like, why is there just this obsessive focus on man-made climate change when natural climate change is a big thing too? And if you go back in history, all kinds of people died from natural disasters all the time. People died from floods, people died from lightning strikes, people died from forest fires. These things all happened. And I'm like, how come we just ignore all that? Why does that not matter? Why does that have zero importance? Okay, well, that's 10 minutes or 11 minutes. That's pretty long. The quality of what I'm saying is decreasing. I think the first 5 minutes of this video is better. So we'll call that a wrap. I got most of the stuff out there. Check out Judith Curry and Bjorn Lumberg. They both have really good stuff on this, I think. Probably better than this video. Anyways, enjoy.